What if history's most feared men were also the most ridiculous? Behind the uniforms and propaganda were silk robes, pet lions, lucky marbles, and a crippling fear of chickens. These are the stories they didn't want remembered. Not crimes, but compulsions. Not strategy, but superstition. From enchanted bath rituals to bowing at furniture, these aren't wartime horrors. They're bedtime absurdities. This is 33 of the weirdest true Nazi stories, unfiltered, documented, and bizarre beyond belief. Because sometimes the scariest people in history were also the most laughably fragile. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed for more strange true stories they don't teach in school. Drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Berlin? 3 a.m. in Texas? We want to know who else is wide awake for this deep dive into the bizarre. 1. Hermann Goering's obsession with silk, makeup, and perfume. In a regime obsessed with uniforms, Hermann Goering preferred something a little more fluid. While others donned grim gray tunics and death's head insignia, Goering was more at home in silk gowns, lavender robes, and pastel pajamas, accessorized, of course, with pearl necklaces and perfume imported from France. He lounged like a bejeweled duchess, his cheeks dusted with rouge, his ego wrapped in satin. To staff, he demanded to be called His Highness, and if you forgot, you'd be corrected, firmly and fragrantly. Visitors expecting a hardened military leader were instead greeted by a perfumed colossus in powder blue loungewear, sipping champagne and smelling like a Parisian brothel. He once wore a cape stitched with hundreds of tiny rubies. He also had a ring made from the bullet that allegedly killed the Red Baron, because, well, why not? But the perfume-slick fantasy didn't end there. It was only the beginning of a house that had its own personal safari, and its own personal lion. 2. Goering's pet lion that roamed his house. Yes, Goering kept a lion. A real one. Named Mookie. While most people settled for dogs or maybe a parrot, Goering preferred apex predators. Mookie wasn't caged. Oh no. He roamed Goering's Grand Hall estate like a bored feline god, brushing past antique furniture and terrifying guests who had merely expected awkward small talk. Dinner parties became endurance tests. Imagine trying to cut your schnitzel while a full-grown lion eyes your plate. Goering thought it was hilarious. Guests didn't. Some refused to come back. One SS official reportedly fainted after Mookie sneezed behind him. Staff had to feed the lion special meat cuts, and once, Goering insisted Mookie wear a decorative collar made of silver. He even claimed the lion had a sense of humor, but no one ever asked whose. As strange as it sounds, Goering wasn't the only Nazi with an aversion to reality. Some of them were scared of things far less dangerous than lions, for instance, chickens. 2. Goering's pet lion that roamed his house. Yes, Goering kept a lion. A real one, named Mookie. While most people settled for dogs or maybe a parrot, Goering preferred apex predators. Mookie wasn't caged. Oh no. He roamed Goering's Grand Hall estate like a bored feline god, brushing past antique furniture and terrifying guests who had merely expected awkward small talk. Dinner parties became endurance tests. Imagine trying to cut your schnitzel while a full-grown lion eyes your plate. Goering thought it was hilarious. Guests didn't. Some refused to come back. One SS official reportedly fainted after Mookie sneezed behind him. Staff had to feed the lion special meat cuts, and once, Goering insisted Mookie wear a decorative collar made of silver. He even claimed the lion had a sense of humor. But no one ever asked whose. As strange as it sounds, Goering wasn't the only Nazi with an aversion to reality. Some of them were scared of things far less dangerous than lions, for instance, chickens, And yes, this is still a true story. A lion, at dinner. in silk-scented Goering's mansion. If you've made it this far into Nazi absurdity, you're clearly one of us. So hit that subscribe button for more real stories that are somehow weirder than fiction. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Who else is listening to Nazi lion tales at 2 a.m.? 3. Himmler's chicken phobia. You can build the SS, orchestrate vast terror machines, and command legions, but put Heinrich Himmler near a chicken and he crumbled like stale strudel. The Reichsfuhrer SS had an irrational fear of live chickens. The clucking, the flapping, the beady eyes, it was too much. He avoided farms like they were cursed zones and refused to eat in outdoor settings where a stray chicken might, God forbid, wander past. On official visits to rural regions, aides had to pre-screen locations for poultry. Farmers were discreetly asked to secure the livestock, as if guarding state secrets. Once, he reportedly canceled a lunch after hearing a distant cluck. He told close confidants that chickens were dirty little monsters. And yet, this same man ran occult societies and talked about Nordic bloodlines with total seriousness. But when it came to hens, utter terror. His anxieties didn't stop with poultry. His bath time involved herbs, stones, and something even stranger. 4. Himmler's herbal baths and magic stones. Each evening, Heinrich Himmler slipped into a steaming bath infused with a custom blend of herbs, not for skin care, not even for relaxation. He believed the mix, something between a medieval potion and overpriced spa soup, purified his aura. Yes, aura. He spoke often of soul energy and kept polished stones in his pockets, which he claimed deflected evil. He carried these stones everywhere, little smooth talismans he'd rub obsessively during meetings. His staff had to label them by purpose, one for strength, one for clarity, one for psychic protection. If a stone went missing, a manhunt ensued. In one instance, he delayed a train departure because his pouch of focus stones was misplaced. Himmler then sat cross-legged in his cabin, staring at the stones like they were going to levitate. Strange, certainly, but he wasn't the only high-ranking Nazi with deeply private obsessions. Joseph Goebbels had one too, specifically involving shoes. 5. Joseph Goebbels' shoe fetish. He had a thing for them. Women's shoes, to be precise. High heels, particularly. Polished, pointed, expensive. Joseph Goebbels, the so-called master propagandist, secretly hoarded shoes like trophies. He didn't just admire them, he collected them, entire closets full. Sometimes he arranged them in lines, admiring their silhouettes like a painter inspecting brushstrokes. Witnesses described him fondling them gently, as if they were rare artifacts. And he had a habit of commenting on women's footwear with eerie precision, knowing the make, the stitching, the heel height. Some women who visited his office later reported that he asked to keep their shoes for aesthetic study. In his private diaries, he occasionally waxed poetic about the elegance of the heel and the whisper of leather. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so unsettling. And speaking of diaries, sometimes he didn't just write in them. Sometimes he wrote letters to himself. 6. Goebbels' love letters to himself. Joseph Goebbels wasn't just his own biggest fan. He was also his own most loyal pen pal. In his private diaries, he didn't just record daily events. He composed emotionally overwrought letters to himself. They read like love notes from a delusional admirer. "My genius burns too brightly for the world," he once wrote. Another entry praised his cosmic role and tragic nobility. No irony, no shame. Goebbels would describe personal decisions as though he were watching a Shakespearean hero at work. "I must carry the burden," he wrote, "for I alone can understand the pain of destiny." The self-praise bordered on performance art. It wasn't enough to be feared or respected. He needed to be mythologized, by himself, for himself. He once described a speech he gave as a thunderbolt hurled by Olympus. not Berlin, Olympus. But delusion wasn't limited to the propagandist. Over in another office, a man named Rudolf Hess was sealing windows shut in a panic over fresh air. 7. Rudolf Hess's fear of drafts and open windows. While bombs rained from the sky, Rudolf Hess's greatest fear remained airflow. He believed that drafts, yes, gentle indoor breezes, were agents of doom. Staff were forbidden from opening windows no matter how hot it got. In the sweltering summer months, Hess would sweat in silence rather than risk the unnatural movement of air. He was convinced drafts carried illness, confusion, even treasonous thoughts. Paranoia met absurdity when he insisted that all meetings take place in rooms with sealed windows and tightly drawn curtains. Guests were instructed not to mention open air at all. It was too distressing. His office became a tomb of stillness, a quiet vacuum where nothing moved unless he moved it. He even commissioned a report on wind psychology, hoping to prove that breezes could destabilize thinking. And if the air didn't get you, the food would. Or so he believed, especially if it wasn't a boiled potato. 8. Hess's food obsession. Only ate boiled potatoes. Rudolf Hess had the culinary curiosity of a boiled sponge. He believed food was either medicine or poison, nothing in between. So he settled on the one meal that he believed purified body and mind: boiled potatoes. No seasoning, no butter, no joy. Just tubers, boiled into bland submission. For days at a time, he'd eat nothing else. Sometimes he added apples. That was his version of a cheat day. He claimed this diet helped him think clearly, though most of his thoughts revolved around drafts and betrayal. Dinner with Hess was a grim affair. Guests were often served the same gray potato mush, accompanied by stern monologues about intestinal integrity. At one point, he even refused water from certain taps, believing the minerals interfered with his clarity. His commitment to dietary purity was matched only by another man's commitment to facial safety. Hitler, for example, refused to shave with a razor unless it came with a bodyguard. 9. Hitler's extreme fear of razor blades. Adolf Hitler's morning routine was less man of steel and more man of steel paranoia. Every shave was a potential assassination attempt in his mind. The razor blade, an object most men trusted without thinking, was, to Hitler, a ticking time bomb. He believed that if even one blade were swapped, it could spell the end of him. Only one barber was permitted to handle his shaving gear. The man had to undergo background checks, daily inspections, and even psychological evaluations. Hitler would often interrogate him mid-shave, just to keep him off balance. Sometimes he refused the blade altogether, letting his stubble grow until his own face unnerved him. Once he canceled a major meeting due to a bad shaving omen. But Hitler's morning rituals weren't all fear and paranoia. Sometimes they were musical. Whistled even, especially when the Disney soundtrack kicked in. 10. Hitler's strange habit of whistling Disney songs. For a man who ranted about degeneracy, Hitler had a soft spot for American cartoons, particularly the ones with talking animals and cheerful tunes. His favorite? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He reportedly watched it multiple times, admiring the purity of its imagery. And when he wasn't watching it, he was whistling it. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf became a regular earworm around the Reich Chancellery. Staff reported him cheerfully humming the tune between meetings, pacing the hallways like a child avoiding homework. Sometimes he'd whistle it right before issuing orders with deadly seriousness, as if the soundtrack of his inner world was permanently stuck in fantasy mode. He considered Disney a genius. The same man who banned jazz and modern art had a deep affection for singing dwarfs. And while the songs were lighthearted, Hitler's digestion was anything but. Enter the enemas. 11. Hitler's flatulence problem and daily enemas. Adolf Hitler's stomach hated him. His flatulence was legendary, enough so that his physicians documented it in detail. He tried everything: Restrictive diets, special teas, anti-gas pills, but none of it really helped. So he turned to a more invasive solution: daily enemas. Yes, each morning, Hitler underwent intestinal cleansing. He believed toxins in the lower intestine clouded judgment and distorted willpower. And so, with the regularity of a Swiss train schedule, he purged himself, hoping to cleanse both body and Führer mind. He also took bizarre herbal supplements from his personal doctor, including concoctions that made his breath smell like rotten apples. His entourage grew used to the strange odors and sudden dashes to the bathroom. But even with all his gut problems, Hitler still found time for the stars. Not movie stars, real ones. Especially if they came with charts, omens, and destiny written in the sky. 12. Hitler's psychic and astrology addiction. Behind the curtain of brutalism and rigid control, Hitler placed immense faith in the least rational of sciences, astrology. He kept astrologers on private retainer, consulted them before major decisions, and reportedly demanded star charts before committing to any major travel. If Mercury was in retrograde, the Reich could wait. He also believed in the prophetic power of dreams. His aides were instructed to document his nightmares, which he analyzed for coded messages. If a dream seemed too ominous, he sometimes canceled events. In his bunker, he kept lucky charms, odd little trinkets he believed offered spiritual protection. One of them was a bent copper coin he refused to discard. He called it the Axis. The man who thought he could conquer Europe also thought he could outwit fate with a lucky penny. And while some Nazis were looking to the stars, others were simply trying to walk very, very far. 13. Albert Speer's walking addiction. Albert Speer didn't walk for exercise. He walked like a man trying to outpace his own conscience. 20 to 30 miles a day, sometimes more, pacing through forests, around Berlin, or simply in circles indoors like a human metronome gone rogue. Staff grew accustomed to seeing him drift past hallways repeatedly, always deep in thought, always calculating something invisible. He insisted walking clarified the mind, but the compulsive scale of it suggested something else, an inability to sit still with himself. Meetings were scheduled around his routes. If he didn't get his steps in, he became agitated and unfocused, muttering about the fog in his head. On long days, he'd walk until his shoes fell apart, then simply fetch a new pair and continue. One aide joked that if Speer ever defected, they'd never catch him. He'd just walk to the next country before anyone noticed. And while Speer walked in circles, he also rewrote his conversations the same way, round and round, until the truth bent into something flattering. 14. Speer's strange hobby, rewriting conversations. Speer treated memory like wet clay, something to reshape until it produced the ideal sculpture of himself. After nearly every significant conversation, he would return to his study, sit at his desk, and rewrite the entire exchange multiple times. Not for clarification, no, for improvement. If a comment he made sounded dull, he sharpened it. If someone else sounded clever, he muted them. If he lost an argument, he staged a triumphant comeback in the retelling. By the time he finished editing, the conversation bore only a polite resemblance to reality. He kept stacks of these revised dialogues, labeling them as if they were historical documents. They weren't. They were fan fiction, written by a man starring as his own misunderstood genius. And while Speer rewrote his reality, another Nazi preferred something far more musical. Enter Reinhard Heydrich and the violin that ruled his household like a tiny wooden dictator. 15. Reinhard Heydrich's secret violin obsession. Reinhard Heydrich, sometimes called the blonde beast behind closed doors, spent hours each day hunched over a violin like a tormented conservatory student. Music wasn't a hobby, it was a compulsion. His playing sessions were sacred time. Anyone who interrupted him risked a volcanic backlash. He practiced obsessively, chasing impossible perfection. Staff members waiting outside his study timed his mood by what they heard through the door. A smooth melody meant safety. A sudden sharp note meant they should probably go home early. Visitors expecting stern military formality instead found a man mid-frenzy, bow flashing, hair disheveled, face contorted in concentration. He boasted he could have been a world-class musician if destiny hadn't needed him elsewhere. Naturally. But while Heydrich tried to conquer the violin, something else conquered him. The terror of illness. 16. Heydrich's extreme hypochondria. Despite his reputation for ruthlessness, Heydrich lived in constant dread of invisible microbes. He believed every headache signaled a grave condition, every cough a looming catastrophe. His home was stocked with medicine cabinets that resembled small pharmacies. He demanded doctors on constant standby, sometimes multiple at once, in case the first one missed something. He washed his hands obsessively, refused to shake hands during flu season, and once lectured an officer for sneezing too aggressively. He monitored his body like it was a malfunctioning machine, describing aches in Baroque detail and requesting tests that baffled even his physicians. No one dared to tell him he was fine. It was safer to prescribe more vitamins. Oddly, his paranoia didn't stop at illness. Another Nazi, Martin Bormann, was terrified of something far simpler: shoes placed on tables. 17. Martin Bormann's superstition about shoes on tables. Martin Bormann, master schemer and bureaucratic overlord, had one great irrational fear: shoes on tables. To him, this wasn't just rude, it was a death omen. If he walked into a room and saw a pair of shoes sitting tabletop, he turned pale as plaster and demanded they be removed immediately. He banned staff from placing footwear anywhere above knee height. Once, when he spotted a shoebox on a conference table, he ordered the entire room cleared and fumigated, as if tragedy lingered in the air like a curse. Bormann insisted the superstition came from rural folklore, but his reaction was far more emotional than cultural. The man could authorize brutal policies without blinking, yet a stray loafer could send him into a philosophical spiral. And speaking of strange objects on display, Bormann also had a habit of giving the world's worst gifts. 18. Bormann's weird gifting habit: dead animals. Bormann believed his gift-giving skills were charming. They were not. His favorite presents were dead animals, stuffed, preserved, mounted, staring blankly into the abyss. Once, he gave a colleague a stuffed dog for a birthday surprise. A full-sized one, with glass eyes, wrapped neatly with a bow as if this were perfectly normal. Recipients never knew how to react. Do you thank him? Do you scream? Do you pretend the creature isn't staring into your soul? Bormann offered these gifts earnestly, believing they conveyed loyalty and permanence. Nothing says our friendship will last forever, quite like a taxidermied terrier apparently. His office became a museum of morbid curiosities. Visitors often left unsettled, wondering whether they'd just witnessed eccentricity or a quiet cry for help. Yet if dead dogs were strange, another Nazi managed to outdo him with a pet bear cub. 19. Ernst Röhm's pet bear cub. Ernst Röhm had the emotional subtlety of a wrecking ball, but his soft spot was undeniably real. He kept a pet bear cub. Yes, a bear. Indoors. At home. The cub ate at the table like an oversized toddler with fur, paws, and questionable table manners. Röhm fed it treats by hand, proudly boasting that it was just like family. Guests, meanwhile, tried to maintain polite smiles while a juvenile bear sniffed their pockets. The animal wandered freely through the residence, occasionally knocking over lamps and terrifying house staff. Röhm considered all of this charming. He once tried to teach the bear to shake hands. It learned to swat instead. Several guests declined future invitations. But if Röhm was living in a bizarre woodland sitcom, the next Nazi lived in a wine-themed delusion all his own, one that unraveled spectacularly whenever he lifted a glass. 20. Joachim von Ribbentrop's wine snobbery. Joachim von Ribbentrop fancied himself a connoisseur of wine, a diplomat of the senses, if not of common sense. He spoke in flowery prose about vintages and terroir, name-dropping obscure French labels like old friends. At dinners, he'd swirl his glass theatrically, sniff with reverence, and deliver long-winded tasting notes as if auditioning for a sommelier society that had never invited him. The only problem? He couldn't tell the difference between a fine Bordeaux and a cheap table blend. At blind tastings, Ribbentrop regularly misidentified wines, sometimes calling vinegar complex. Once he confidently declared a mediocre German white as a rare Alsatian treasure, only to be corrected by the waiter who'd opened it. Behind his back, staff mocked his wine blunders relentlessly. But to his face, no one dared contradict him. You didn't correct Ribbentrop, you just passed the bottle and let him embarrass himself, and when he wasn't misjudging wine, he was doing something even stranger, bowing to chairs. 21. Ribbentrop's strange habit of bowing to furniture. As Germany's foreign minister, Ribbentrop practiced diplomatic protocol like it was Olympic sport. He drilled his bowing technique endlessly, angle, timing, hand placement, until it became second nature. So second nature, in fact, that he sometimes bowed to furniture. Witnesses recall him entering empty rooms and performing respectful nods toward well-upholstered chairs, mistaking them for dignitaries in the dim lighting. At one event, he reportedly bowed to a coat rack before realizing his mistake. He then covered by complimenting its stature. This wasn't a one-off. Ribbentrop rehearsed greetings so obsessively that he blurred the line between protocol and parody. Staff observed him practicing curtsies in front of mirrors, just in case. While others in the regime worshipped power, Ribbentrop worshipped etiquette. But even he had his odd health beliefs. Water, for instance, wasn't just a drink to one of his colleagues. It was medicine, clocked and calculated down to the minute. 22. Karl Doenitz's belief in water cures. Karl Doenitz, head of the German Navy and later Hitler's brief successor, believed hydration held mystical power. But not just any hydration. He followed a strict water schedule, drinking precise quantities at carefully timed intervals. He logged his intake in a personal notebook like a sea captain charting the tides. Each glass was consumed with ceremonial seriousness. He believed that if water was taken at the wrong hour, it could disrupt internal rhythms. Too much before noon? Confusion. Too little after sunset? Restlessness. He avoided cold water on Wednesdays, claiming it interfered with strategic thinking. Staff joked that he treated water like medicine and medicine like water, interchangeable fluids with magical consequences. He even delayed meetings to align with the hydration cycle. But Doenitz wasn't the only one with strange nightly rituals. One governor found peace not in schedules, but in fur. 23. Hans Frank's fur bed habit. Hans Frank, the so-called butcher of Poland, had one peculiar comfort. He slept on a bed covered entirely in animal furs, not a blanket here or there, entire layers of fur, wall to wall, covering his mattress like a taxidermist's fever dream. He claimed the furs helped him dream like a wolf. Apparently, lupine sleep quality was the key to governance. He'd brag about vivid dreams and nocturnal visions, attributing them not to his own subconscious, but to the warmth of pelts that once belonged to foxes, bears, and occasionally exotic cats. House staff found the fur obsession unsettling. The bedroom smelled faintly of musk and mothballs, and few dared enter unless summoned. Some joked that he slept on a zoo crime scene. Frank once demanded a fur shipment reroute from Paris to complete a dream-enhancing layer. The shipment was delayed. His mood tanked. But if Frank surrounded himself with fur, another figure was more concerned with reflections, 4 of them to be precise. 24. Joseph Mengele's mirror routine. Joseph Mengele, the so-called angel of death, had a deeply vain side that few spoke of but many witnessed. In his personal quarters, he kept 4 mirrors, each placed strategically so he could view himself from every possible angle. Every morning he'd spend extended periods, sometimes over an hour, adjusting his hair, tilting his chin, and inspecting his reflection like an artist evaluating a self-portrait. He had an arsenal of combs, brushes, creams, and oils. A single strand out of place warranted a full reset. Witnesses said he spoke to his reflection occasionally, often with a half smile and a nod of approval. This mirror ritual wasn't just about appearance, it was performance. Mengele seemed to be preparing for a role only he understood. The flawless, composed image of himself he believed the world needed to see. And to complete this image, he always wore one consistent accessory: white gloves. 25. Mengele's obsession with white gloves. White gloves were Mengele's signature, but not just in the clinical or symbolic sense. He wore them obsessively, everywhere. Not just during work, not just in public, but during private meals, solitary walks, and even while writing. He kept dozens of identical pairs, rotated daily, and reportedly had strict rules about their storage and cleanliness. Gloves were never reused without inspection. One crease or speck of lint could spark a minor outburst. He once delayed a train departure because the pair he was given that morning felt wrong. Staff speculated the gloves were part vanity, part control. With them, he could maintain the illusion of spotless detachment. The man did monstrous things, but his gloves? Always immaculate. He wasn't the only one obsessed with outward appearances. Another officer expressed his deference not through fashion but through bowing, excessively. 26. Wilhelm Keitel's extreme deference. Wilhelm Keitel wasn't so much a military leader as he was a full-time bowing machine. His deference to Hitler bordered on performance art. He bowed so deeply and so often that soldiers mockingly nicknamed him Le Keitel, a pun that basically means lackey with epaulets. He bowed when entering rooms. He bowed when leaving them. He bowed mid-conversation, even when no one else was watching. His spine was practically shaped by submission. During briefings, he would nod and agree with Hitler so profusely it looked choreographed. Staff joked that if Hitler had tripped over a carpet, Keitel would have volunteered to be the new carpet. But Keitel wasn't just submissive. He was superstitious, too. In his pocket, he carried a strange object at all times. Not a medal, not a talisman, a child's marble. 27. Keitel's lucky charm, a child's marble. For a man who helped oversee the machinery of war, Wilhelm Keitel carried a strangely innocent talisman in his pocket. A small blue marble. Not a military token, not a family heirloom. Just an ordinary child's glass marble. He reportedly found it during a walk and became convinced it held protective powers. From that day on, it never left his coat. Before meetings, he'd reach into his pocket and give it a discreet rub, like a priest fingering prayer beads. During tense conversations, he'd roll it between his fingers under the table. He claimed it calmed his nerves and kept the odds in balance. He even credited the marble with helping him avoid danger during a near-miss bombing. After that, it became sacred. One day, he misplaced it and refused to attend a briefing until it was found. An aide eventually located it beneath a sofa cushion. But Keitel wasn't the only one chasing luck in odd places. Another man believed the key to divine insight came not from a marble but from sleep, guided by something far more ancient. 28. Dietrich Eckart's occult sleep rituals. Dietrich Eckart, early Nazi ideologue and mentor to Hitler, didn't sleep like most men. He believed that true visions, the kind that shaped history, came only through ritualized dreaming. Each night he performed a personal ceremony, placing a worn Bible beneath his pillow, lighting a single candle, and reciting what he called spirit-inviting verses. He claimed the Bible acted as a conduit for cosmic truth. With it, he believed, he could access the secret voices behind the veil. He kept a dream journal by his bedside, and each morning he would scribble down cryptic symbols, strange phrases, and references to ancient Germanic myths. One entry reportedly read, "The lion walks east when the stone is blue." His sleep habits unnerved guests. One friend claimed Eckhart whispered to the darkness before drifting off. Another said he muttered Old Norse names in his sleep. But while Eckhart invoked the old gods, another Nazi was invoking something else entirely, American jazz. 29. Baldur von Schirach's love for American jazz. Publicly, Baldur von Schirach denounced American culture as decadent and corrupt. Privately, he collected jazz records like Forbidden Fruit, Swing, Big Band, Bebop. His personal stash could rival a Harlem nightclub's rotation. He listened in secret, often behind locked doors, swaying to the rhythms of Ellington and Basie while railing against cultural impurity in public speeches. He knew the risks. Jazz was banned, labeled degenerate by the regime. Yet von Schirach called it irresistible. He reportedly referred to certain records as soul food, a jarring term for a man who orchestrated mass propaganda. Sometimes, late at night, aides heard saxophones drifting from his quarters. He never acknowledged it. When asked about his taste in music, he would change the subject or launch into a tirade about Mozart. But his collection stayed, hidden, protected. Von Schirach wasn't the only one obsessed with texture and sensation. For another Nazi officer, the ultimate betrayal came from a hotel soap bar that wasn't quite soft enough. 30. Karl Wolff's soap fragility obsession. Karl Wolff, high-ranking SS officer and Himmler's right-hand man, had what can only be described as a luxury problem. He was deeply, almost spiritually offended by bad hotel soap. And not just bad soap. Soap that wasn't soft enough. He inspected every bar like a jeweler examines a diamond. Too firm? Complaints were filed. Too chalky? Staff were reprimanded. In one infamous incident, he summoned an entire hotel staff at midnight because the soap left a dry residue. He demanded replacements from a different brand, shipped in overnight. His own home was stocked with imported bars from Italy, France, and select German apothecaries. Each one had to pass his skin test, which involved him lathering, rinsing, then sniffing his hands with a solemn expression. When traveling, he brought backup bars in padded cases. This wasn't hygiene, it was obsession. And yet, even his fixation couldn't outshine the irrational affection another officer had for something even less functional, a desk lamp. 31. Alfred Jodel's lucky desk lamp. Alfred Jodel believed that one particular lamp on his desk held the power to influence fate. It wasn't particularly ornate, just a brass lamp with a green shade. But to Jodel, it was more than a light source. It was a charm, a beacon, a ritual object. He refused to write military reports unless it was turned on, even in the middle of the day, even under bright sunlight. If the bulb blew, all work ceased until a replacement was found. Once, during a power outage, he reportedly sat frozen at his desk, hands clasped, waiting for electricity to return before writing a single sentence. He claimed the lamp channeled focus. Aid reports suggested that Jodel once delayed delivering orders by several hours because the lamp had been moved 3 inches to the left. It was always returned to its exact place. But while Jodel needed his lamp, another man needed something smaller, sharper, and infinitely more replaceable: pencils. 32. Adolf Eichmann's pencil addiction. Adolf Eichmann didn't just use pencils. He needed them. Specifically, short, worn-down stubs, the kind most people throw away. He carried them everywhere, in his coat, in his boots, in secret compartments of his briefcase. If he didn't have the right one, panic set in. He had dozens, but each had its own personality. Too sharp made him uneasy. Too dull made him agitated. He once left a meeting because the only pencil available was overbalanced. Colleagues learned to carry backups just in case. He'd test them obsessively, scribbling on corners of napkins, twisting them between fingers like worry stones. The right pencil made him efficient, he claimed. The wrong one? Total chaos. His desk drawer was a graveyard of discarded stubs, each retired with quiet reverence. But no pencil could prepare him for the final eccentricity in our list. The last word, reserved not for a general, but for a woman who refused to be seen drinking water. 33. Eva Braun's bizarre photo rule. Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, had one peculiar rule for anyone photographing her: never capture her drinking water. Not wine, not coffee, just water. She believed it made her look too ordinary. Hydration, in her mind, ruined the illusion of glamour. She enforced the rule with theatrical strictness. If someone snapped a candid shot and she was mid-sip, she'd demand the film be destroyed or the photo retouched. She once made a photographer reschedule an entire shoot because she'd been caught holding a glass of sparkling water between takes. Her paranoia extended to public appearances. Waitstaff were instructed to pour her drinks discreetly, and she often sipped from opaque containers to avoid suspicion. To the outside world, she wanted to appear effortless, elegant, untouchable, even if it meant dehydrating under studio lights. Because in a world ruled by fear, fantasy, and delusion, the image was everything.